So in this video, we'll be exploring how we can build the main dashboard page. There is these three databases that is here. So the first is budget mixes, entries, and the active budgets. So these are the only three. These are the only views that we'll be creating in this video. So let's see how we can do that. So let's just explore what is in the backend of this system. So let's see what are the databases that is used to create this system. So you can see that by going to this other page that is here. So inside this page, you have all of the main databases that is there for the system. So this system is entirely made of only three databases. That is the only databases that we require. So one is for the transactions, which is called the entries or cash flow entries database. And after that, you have the budgets and the budget mix database. So let's see how we can build this system from scratch. So I have actually created a page for that. So let's get into a blank page to build this entire system from scratch so that you can actually build this template for yourself and understand how it works. So in case you don't want to build it by yourself and you want an existing template, this template is available for free in the template marketplace. The link for the template will be given in the description below. You can just get the template for free from the template marketplace. As I told earlier, the databases that we'll be requiring are just these three databases that is here, which is nothing but the cash flow, the entries, the transaction database, the budgets, and the budget mix databases. So let's build these databases here. So to create the database, let's create a separate page for that. So let's call that the databases. And after we have these databases page, now we're going to create the databases that is required. First, we'll be creating the inline databases just for us to understand what we are creating. The first one is going to be transactions. After that, we have budget fixes. Then we have the budgets. So these are three databases that is required. So once we have created the databases, the next step for us is to create the properties that is required in each of these databases. So before we continue with that, let's enable the full width so that it's much more better to view now. So now we have the transactions, budget mixes, and budgets. So let's start with creating the properties for the databases. So in the transactions, the first property that we need is we need to create the basic properties, which is going to be date, and let's actually call that time. After that, we'll need the amount property, which is a number. Let's create the amount value. Now after that, we need some other properties here. So let's see what are the other properties that we have in the transactions. So time, amount, and these four are the most important properties in the transactions database. So let's create this. So next thing is going to be the type. So it's going to be status property. So it is better to use the status property because status property you can assign a default value to each of the transactions that is added. So you don't have to add it every time you create the page. You can just add that when you need to actually change that. Actually, we're adding both of the income and expenses in the same transactions place. So yeah, that is an important one. So let's call this type. Let's edit the property. So that the other one is going to be expense. And let's call orange there. Brown is fine. Okay, so these are the two types of transactions. So let's add another property. It's going to be a relation property. So we need to relate the transactions to the budget mixes. So let's call that budget mix. So every transaction can select exactly one budget mix. So we need to create the limit as one page and the two-way relation to be enabled so that we have the transactions relation shown in the budget mix also. So let's create add relation. As you can see, it's also showing the transactions relation property in the budget mixes page since we have enabled show on both pages. Show on, so just see here it shows two-way relation. So since this is on, you can see the relation property in both databases. So these are the basic databases as required. Uh, so these are the basic properties that is required for the transaction database. Now let's add properties for budget mixes. So for the budget mixes, the main ones are going to be the budget relation. So what are the budgets that are inside the budget mix? So let's get relation property for that. Let's call that budgets. Budgets. There's going to be no limit because it includes more than one budgets. To a relation, and let's call that as budget mixes. As you can see, it is also showing the property in the other database since we have enabled two-way relation. So in budget mixes, the other properties would be the uniform appropriation ratio. So for that, we'll be using a text property. So in the text property, let's call this uniform appropriation ratio. That, that's a property. Let's call this expense appropriation ratio. So these are the basic properties that is required for the budget mixes for it to work. So let's just quickly check about the other databases here. So let's check the budget mix categories for any other property that is required. So as you can see, we have these two properties here, the transactions and the budgets properties, and the income and expense apportionment ratios. And the other ratios, other properties are just helper properties. So we won't be requiring that mix as of now. So we might require this appropriation list details property here. So we might require that. So we'll be creating that when we require in the budget database. So for now, let's just keep going on. So this is a property that is required in budget mixes. Now let's add the properties that is required for the budgets database. So in the budget database, the first one is going to be the type of the budget. So earlier I said it was limit or goal. There are two types of budgets. So let's add that. So we'll be using the status property just like for the transactions. Let's call that type. So let's select the property. Let's call this goal. And the other one for expenses is going to be called limit. So for income, it's going to be called goal, and for expenditure, the budget is going to be called limit. So let's create a brown color for that. That's all. Yeah. So the next property that is required for budgets is the amount. The amount in the budget that is the most important property. So let's call this the amount. What is the limit or goal for this budget? Next, we will require the start date and end date. So let's create a date property. Let's call the start date. After that, we can create an end date, but let's create the number of days for the budget, and you can automatically calculate the end date for that. So let's call the number, and we can call this number of days. And let's add a formula property to calculate the end date. Formula. Let's call this the end date. So this formula for end date is a straightforward formula. It's just a simple formula. So let's create the formula for that. So the first formula is it's going to be start date, and we're going to use a date add function. This adds number of days, the start date, and the number of days is going to be the number of days property. So number of days property, and it's going to be days, and it will add some number of days to start date, and it will give the end date. So that is the end date. So these are some of the important properties in budgets. So as you might have observed that budgets database does not have transactions property because the budgets will not be directly connected to the transactions database. It will be the budgets will be connected to the budget mixes, and the budgets will automatically take the amount or the total reach amount from using the budget mixes using a filter using the apportionment ratios. So we'll be getting to the details about how we can do that later on. So for now, let's create the properties. So the next property in the budget database is going to be the reach amount, which is a formula property. So which is going to be called the reach amount. So this is the amount that will be calculated based on the transactions using the budget mixes ration property. So that is about the reach amount. So this is a formula that we need to type. So this is the main formula. So this is the main formula that we are going to be working on for the system to work properly. So yeah, that is about the budget reach amount property. Now let's see if we have created all the properties that is required for the budgets. So let's go to the other. So as you can see, there is type, amount, each amount, start date, number of days, end date, and budget mixes, and we have created all the basic required properties. So this progress and limit is nothing but a calculated formula based on the amount and amount. So we can create that later on as required. So and we have the progress text that is also a calculated formula. So for now we have created all the necessary properties for the budgets. So let's see how we can create the functionality for these databases. So to better create the databases, we will create sample pages in each of the databases. So this is the sample data for transactions, budget mixes, and budgets. Now let's create the necessary formulas for the system to work. So the first thing that we need to do here is we need to add the income and expense apportionment ratios so that for the transactions, if this budget mix is selected, the amount of these transactions can be apportioned to their budgets in that given ratio. So now let's add the ratios for that. So since we are having two budgets in this budget mix, we need to add exactly two apportionment ratios. Now, as you can see, we have added the income apportionment ratio. So we need to ensure that all of the numbers here add up to 100 because only then the ratios are valid. So here 50-50 adds to 100, 25-75 adds to 100, and these three adds to 100 again, and all of these values adds to 100. So any transaction that is allocated to the summer budget mix will be apportioned to the new budget and another budget in 50-50%. So 50% of the amount will go to new budget, and the next 50% will be going to another budget for income type of transactions. If the transaction type is expense, then 25% of that transaction will go to the new budget and 100% will go to the another budget. So this is how the overall logic is going to be working. So now let's select the budget mixes for the transactions. So as you can see, each of the mixes have their own transactions, and for each of the transactions, these transactions can have exactly one budget mix. So if you select any other budget mix, it is going to be selected that and it's going to be added in that budget mix. So transactions can only have one budget mix. So now let's select the sum of budget mix so that each of the mixes have at least one transactions. So that is about the sample data. The next thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating the formulas for these databases. So first, let's create the formulas that is required. The main formula that we want to calculate is the reach amount. The reach amount is nothing but how much of the budget is actually completed. So we need to get the data from the transactions, and we're not going to be asking the transactions directly about what is the amount that you're having and adding that amount. Instead, we will be having a middleman which is called the budget mixes, and we will ask the budget mix to give all the transactions that is relevant, and it will also ask for the income apportionment ratio from income or expense apportionment ratio, and it will split the transaction that it gives into this apportionment ratio and only take that amount. So that is what we are going to be seeing, and that is what we'll be saying about what we will be doing in the formula. So let's start creating the formula. So the first step that we're going to be doing is we need to ask the budget mix about what are the transactions that is relevant for us. So we'll be using the map function for that, so that each of the budget mix gives the transactions that it holds. The first will be asking the budget mixes. So we have a budget mix relation, so that is going to be useful here. So budget mix relation dot map. So we are going to be asking the budget mix to give all the transactions it has. So we'll be using the current dot transactions, and now each of the budget mix will return its own transaction. So now we have a list of lists. So as you can see, this is a list. Each of the budget will give its transaction list, and now we have the transaction list. The next thing that we want to do here is we want to apportion it. We need to, like, okay, now we are saying the budget mix to give all the transactions the budget mix has, but that is not what we want. So we want for each of the transactions, we only want how much of the amount is our amount. So we need to ask that to the budget mix. So the budget mix has the income apportionment ratio or generally the amount apportionment ratios. So we need to also ask the budget mix to split the transaction amount in our apportionment ratio, so that for each of the transaction we get only what is our part in that amount. So here additionally we also need to ask the transactions to give its amount. So we're going to be using the dot notation to get its amount. So already use the map function to get current dot amount. So now we're also asking each of the transactions. So budget mixes we are asking to give us the transactions, and now for each of the transaction in the list we are asking the transaction to give its amount. So now we have a list of lists. We only have a list of amounts. So as you can see, we have a list. Each of these is a number. Okay. Now, as you can see, this amount is the entire amount of the transaction, but this is not what we want. So we only want what is our part in the budget. So for the summer budget, if the transaction type is income, we need to only get 50% of the amount. And if it is expense type, you need to only get 25% of the amount. For example, for the summer budget. So how are we going to implement that? So first, we need to get the budget mix. The budget mix is not only going to return the transaction value, it is also going to return the transaction amount into the apportionment ratio for us. So what we're going to do is we are going to create a helper function for this. So for now we can close this window. So you're going to create a helper function in the budget mixes databases so that the budget can ask for what is its apportionment ratio and only take that amount from there. So let's create the helper function. So let's call that apportionment helper. So what we want here is the budget needs to use this list here to find what its apportionment ratio is from the database. So to do that, so we cannot only create just one budget, we need to make sure that it dynamically works. So what we need to do is we need to kind of first take all the budgets that is in the budget mix. We're going to take the budget and we are going to create a list with that budget. For each of the budget, we are going to use the map function, and inside the map function, first we are going to create a list for each of the budget, and inside that list, we will have the budget itself. So the first, the budget page, and the budget page is also called as the current value here, which gives us the budget page, and we also want another value, which is the ratio for that budget. So we are going to get the value using the built-in index function for the map and the income apportionment ratio using the split function. So we'll be using the first we'll have the income and then we'll have the expense apportionment ratio. So let's call the income apportionment ratio. So now if you see here, we are having a new budget and a list of 50/50, which is a text. So which is nothing but another part of the list. So we need to kind of split this in the comma, and you need to get only the ratio of the current value. So we are going to use the index function for that. We're going to use the add function and use the index as the value, so that we can match which budget is taken there and its ratios. And likewise, we need to also go for the expense ratios. Now, as you can see, for each of the budget, it is returning a main list, and inside that main list we have sublists, and each of the sublists is nothing but the budget page itself and the income apportionment ratio of that budget and the expense apportionment ratio of that budget. Now, since this is a list, we can use this property in the budget database to ask the budget mix database to return this list, and we can use the list in the format that you're creating here. So let's continue with that. So this is the helper function that you want to create. So let's close this window. As you can see, each of the budget is mapped with its income value, income ratio, and its expense ratio. So income ratio is here 50 for the first budget and 25 for the first budget. As you can see, for the income ratio 50 and 25, another budget is 50 and 75. And here also you can see the income is 33 for each, and there is 33 for each. And after that you have expense ratios 25, 35, and 40. So that is how 25, 35, and then 40. This is how it maps these things. So we can use this list here to calculate the reach amount, that is for the budget that you are calculating. So now let's go to the reach amount formula here. So now we need only the amount which is relevant to us. We only need the portion of the amount that is belongs to this budget. So we're going to ask the budget mix also for the list that you're having. So inside this main map function, we're going to create a let function. The first variable that I'll be creating is the budget mix variable, which is nothing but the current value. Now here, let's create another value, which is the transactions. Transactions is nothing but the budget mix, or it's nothing but the transactions of the budget mixes. Next, what we want from the list we created earlier from the helper function, we need our list of what are the income and expense ratios. So to get that, what we'll be doing is we'll be using the filter function for that. So we'll call that ratios list, and that is nothing but budget mix. So we're having a budget mix value here. So budget mix dot the helper function. So let's call the apportionment helper function, and we're going to use the filter function. So we are going to ask the budget mix to only return inside. So apportionment list helper is a list, and we are going to filter that list. This is nothing but sublist. We're going to filter the list of sublist only if the current dot first value on the list is the current page. So let's do that. So every page has its own ID property, and you can call the ID property here also. And if it's the same property, you only want list like that. And once we have a filtered list, now this is our ratios list. Now let's see what the ratios list returns. As you can see, for each of the budget mix in the relation, it is only returning the ratios list for that budget mix. And so this current budget is called new budget, the formula that you're currently working on. So it's new budget, you can see here. So the new budget, for every budget mix, we are only getting the ratios, apportionment ratios, the income ratio and the expense ratio for the budget in the budget mix. The next, we want for each of the transaction next, we want to take the transactions and transactions. So we are having the transactions variable here. We're going to take the transactions and filter that, or we're going to use the map function. So what you're going to say is we are going to ask the transaction to give its amount, but only with the validation. So the first validation is you're going to ask what is its type. So if we're going to use the if function here, so inside the transactions, this map value, we have a current variable which gives us current transaction. We're going to ask what is the current transaction dot type. So use lower thing. So is equals lower makes all the letters lowercase, that it's easy to compare. It is much more so that it's not so case sensitive. So yeah, we're going to use lower function. So current dot type dot lower is if it is income, then you have to return the current amount, but only ratios list that. So the second value of the list is the income ratio. So we're going to get that ratio. So you're going to use the one because it is zero based. So the second value is indexed using the one. So we're going to get that. And since it is a full number, it is not in percentage. We need to convert that into percentage. So we're going to use 500. You can put that in brackets. So it's much more understandable. And if it is not type of income, so we can actually use this here. So it's much more readable. So if not like that, so current dot type dot load, then you want the same thing here, but only that the instead of taking the second value, you'll take the third value, which is the expense ratio. I also want to take the first list in the filtered list. I don't know why it is showing errors. It is because you're calling this two times. So we have to do one more thing here. So we cannot take the ratios list at one as this. So first we need to convert that into a number since it is text. So let's use the two number function here. And here also let's use the two number function. Now, as you can see, it is returning a list of numbers, and as you can see, for each of the budget mix, it is returning only the amount, which is returning the amount for which it is a part of the new budget. And now we need the sum of all of these amounts. It is going to give us the reach amount. Now this is a required reach amount. So that is how we calculate the reach amount for each of the budget. So once we calculate this amount, everything else is much more easier and simpler. So we need to see what are the other formats that we need to build. So let's go to the build tracker template and the actual budget tracker that you are having. So inside this we have several databases and we need to go to the budget mix database. So we need to go to the other and inside that we need to go to budget mix and there we have the formulas. So let's actually open the budget tracker in another page. So let's open this page in a new tab. So we have open a new tab. So let's go into our database that we are currently building. Now let's see what are the other formulas that we require to complete this thing. So for budgets, let's go to the budgets database. So let's maybe we can go from the top, we can go from transactions. So let's see what are the formulas that we require. So in this name property, so we have the basic properties that is required: name, time, amount, type, and budget mix. So let's see what are the other properties that is here. So here we have these properties. Now we have an amount property called amount calculated. This is unnecessary for us. So let's just hide the property here. So next property we are having is the enter manual time. So this enter manual time is used in the UI. So if you go to UI, here when you click on one of the transactions, you can see there will be toggle for you to enter manual time. And if you enter the manual time, the time that is taken for that will be the manual time that you enter here and not the created time. So that is one of the things here. So if you toggle that off, so it will be sorted on some other basis and not basis that you just did. So yeah, so that is about the manual time. So if you enter this manual time and for example if the manual time is not entered, so let's clear this value here. So if you clear this value and you set not entered, so it will by default take the time which is when the page was created. So that is the difference between the enter manual time and not enter manual. So that is the enter manual time. So let's create a property called enter manual time. So let's call this enter manual time. So that is enter manual time. So next, let's go to the next property. So we need to go to the page which we are working on. So we are in the others formula. So let's go into the cash flow entry. So let's see other properties that we require. So other properties are enter manual time. Just stated that and I just explained you why we are using the amount enter manual time this property here. Now for that we have the created time property. So created time property here, these three properties here go together. So the enter manual time, created time and manual time goes together. So as of now in our build that we have created, as of now the time is actually a manual property that we need to enter details. So here instead what we need is we need the time to pay calculated property and it needs to check if the manual time is empty. If it is empty, it takes the created time value, otherwise it takes the manual time value. So here actually the enter manual time is not so relevant, but it just exists, so we're just doing that. So maybe you can delete, you can hide this property also. Next we are having the created time and manual time. So this is used to calculate the time property here. So now let's go to our build that we're building. So in this thing, we are having a specific or manual time property. You can create, you can compute the time property automatically. So we can have two times. The first one is created time. So let's add a created time property. That's a built-in property inside Notion. You can just click that and it will show the created time for the page. And enter manual time. So this actually I meant to create a checkbox, but it is a dead property. So we can just kind of delete this here. So we don't actually need this property anymore. So we don't have to create that. We don't need the property. So now let's create. So we have created the created time property here. So let's create the manual time property. So this is going to be a date property. And yeah, so that is the thing. So now this time property that we are having here to calculate the time for the transaction, it needs to be a formal property that dynamically takes the credit time or manual time based on some criteria. So let's edit the property. So we have to actually change the type of the property. So from date, it changes to formula. So it is auto calculated based on the credit time and manual time. So we need to check for a condition. So let's use an if function here. So the formula asks one thing to the page. It asks whether the manual time is empty. So if the time that is entered manually is empty, then you have to take the created time for the page. And if there is some date, some time that is manually entered, then you can take the manual time. So that is what we're doing here. So it asks the page. So if the manual time is empty, so let's call the manual time property dot empty. So it asks if manual time is empty, and if it is empty, then you can take the default created time for the page as the time. Otherwise, you can take the manual time. So now at any given time, there will be a time property that is here, because at some transactions, if you did not add the time for the transaction, the system would not be working as required, because the time is an essentially important thing. So we need some default time, so that is what we are doing here. And at some times we also want to enter manual time so that the transaction time is more accurate. So at that time, this is going to be helpful. So that is the created time and manual time. So now let's see what are the other properties that is in the database. So now we have the plus or minus budget percentage. So what it essentially means, so this property here is for the UI. So this is completely UI property. This is nothing to do with any logics or anything. This is just taking the budgets. So what it's doing is it is giving a summary of the budget mix relation property here, and it is taking the budget mix and the ratios inside this budget mix. So if you go to the budget mix here, you can see these ratios here. Likewise, for this database, there are some ratios for the budget mix, and that is just combined with these budgets that is selected, and it is just displaying the values. So that is the budget plus or minus percentage. So it's actually computing the details. So it is actually taking this amount, and it is calculating, doing some percentages based on the budget value, and it is just doing that. So this is a very useful UI thing here. So let's just explain the formula. So I'll not be creating the formula here, I'll just be explaining what it is. So first, it is we are creating some variables, some names that we can call. So you can just see what this is. So first we are having budgets. So we are calling budgets. So what are budgets? Budgets are nothing but all the budgets is all the budget mix, and we're asking all the budget mix to give what are the budgets that is inside them. So we're calling a map function, and for each budget mix you're saying give me all the budgets that you're having, and we are flattening out that list. So we are having list of budget mix, and each of the individual budget mix inside that list is giving its budget that it is having. Now we have a list of lists. So by using the flat function here, we are flattening all the list of lists into a single list of all the budgets for all the budget mixes that the transaction is having. So, but technically speaking, the transaction can have only one budget mix, so there's only going to be one list inside the list, but we need a flat function anyway to flatten out the list to only have one list. So that is budgets. Next, we are having the budget effect. So budget effect is the actual value or the UI that we want to show. So budget effect is nothing but what is the UI that you're seeing here. So there's actually two cases. So if there is no budget mix is allocated for the transaction, we need to show that the budget mix or no, we need to show that the budget mix is relation property is empty. So that is what we're doing here. So budget effect is nothing but the UI that you're seeing here. So let's see what the UI does. So inside that, what we need is for each of the budget mix that we are having inside. So for the budget mix of the transactions, we are asking the budget to give all the budgets, and for each of the budgets we are giving a task for it to complete, and we are telling it to give the result. So for each of the budget we are asking the budget to give its amount and divide that by the current dot amount, which means we are telling how much amount of that other budget. So here we are having the transaction amount. The transaction amount is called amount here. Current dot amount is the budget amount. So how much percentage of the amount is being, what is the percentage of the total amount of that budget, and what is the current budget's name. So we are telling each of the budget in that list to give two things in a list. So the first thing should be the amount of the current transaction. We'll also give the amount transaction of the current. We'll give the amount of the current transaction, and it will calculate the percentage by taking its amount, its total budget amount. It will divide that and create a percentage that is in the first part of the list. And it will also give another thing in the list, which is the current budget name. So it will also give its name in the list. So if every budget is giving this list here. And then after that, as we discussed earlier, we are flattening out the list so that we have a single list. Since we're taking that from the budget mix, it would be by default a list of lists, so we are flattening that out. And once you flat the list, so we are having a list of budgets, and for each of the budget it is returning a list with the percentage and the name of the budget. So now we are having a list of lists, and each list has the percentage comma the budget name. So we are taking for each of those individual lists inside that new updated list. Now we are calling a map function, and we are telling we are formatting that value there. So what you're doing is we are creating a let function inside that map, and just imagine what I'm trying to say. It's like it might seem very like too nested, but it's kind of simple. You can just kind of try to imagine what I'm trying to just explain. So inside this map function, you're taking each of this individual list and you're creating a let function for that. So the percentage is going to be current at 0, 1, which is nothing but the first value in the list. As I told, the first value there is the percentage of the completion or percentage of the budget amount. So we are taking that, we are formatting that and adding a percentage before that. That is what is shown here. So first part of the displayed for each of the budget. And after that, you are having the budget name, which is nothing but the second value that is returned in the list, and that is accessed using the current at 1. So since it is zero based index, the second value is accessed using 1. So we are getting the budget name from the second part of the list that is called so we are accessing that using current dot at 1. That is the budget name. And after that, we are returning. So this let's function here is returning this. So you can just enter value to be much more clearer. So this part here, so this thing here is what is returned by the let function. And inside that, we are just formatting this thing. So we are asking what is the type. So this type here is a transaction type. So if it is current income transaction, then you're adding a plus, and if it is not an income, we're adding a minus, and you're adding the percentage. So this percentage here, and after that, we are adding the budget name. So the percentage of how much of that budget plus the budget name, and we are styling the result here. So here is actually another nested style function. So we're styling the function into green or orange. So yeah, that is the simple thing here. So the simple logic is just this one. So this if function is the only logic, and after that we are sending this entire list into a style function, that is the dot style here, and we are checking the type of the current transaction. If it is income, we format it into a green color style, if and after that we are also checking if the we are actually styling based on two things. So first we are having a code here, so that is the first style option, and after that you are having we need to select the color. So for selecting the color, we are using an if function. So if the type is income, then we return green, otherwise orange. And after that, we are selecting the background. So in the background, we are again checking the type of the transaction. If it is income, you return a green background like this one here. Otherwise, you just don't have any background for the other transactions. And then we just close all the brackets here. So we're closing all the map function and everything. And after that, we now have a list of these kind of individual uh, text here, and now we are joining that using an enter function. So this space here, actually if you just look at the debug mode, it is actually an enter here. So that is what is done here. So of each of the individual text here will be joined by an enter, and when you look at the UI, it will be likely a list of how much effect this transaction has on each of the budgets it is allocated to. So this is one of the thing. So this is the budget effect. Now there is one edge case or one situation where there is no budget means that is allocated to the transaction, which means this would not work as required. So in that case, what you're first checking is we are checking. So this here after this is what is returned by the outer or the first let's function here. So this is what is returned. So we are wrapping this entire function here into a budget effect variable, and we are checking for one thing before returning the result. So we are checking if the budget is empty. So if the budget is empty, we need to return no budgets allocated, and we are also saying to click the page to add. So this is what we are showing if there is no budgets or the budget is empty or the budgets relation is not selected yet. So if it is empty, it will be showing this UI here. So this UI here will be showing that. And if the budget is not empty, which means we can do the calculations here, and we are just displaying what we just calculated. That is the budget effect. and we're just displaying that. So if the budget is there, we'll just display that. So that is the entire, that is the formula here. So now if you just look at the values here, you can just understand how this thing is working. So here, as you can see, it is showing, since it is expense type, it is orange and there is no background, as we just showed here, and it dynamically calculates how much percentage of the budget is being used up or added in this UI. So here, as you can see in the first that we just added, there is no budgets that is allocated to this transaction. The budget mix is empty, so it is showing no budgets allocated. So it's saying click the page to add, which means you can click this page here. So you can just open this page and add the budget mix here, like add new or link existing. You can do as required. So here you can just select some budget here. So let's say into budget mix, and as you can see, it is showing the 50% value here. So just as an information, like just to say what is the 50%. So let's take this example. So here it is 25,000 of amount. So since it is showing 50% of winter budget, which means if we do reverse calculation, which means, or if we just try to understand the logic. So if 25,000 is 50% of the winter budget, then the winter budget should be a total of 50,000 of value. So let's see if that is correct. So we need to go to the other database and let's go to the budget. And we are having winter budget here, and as you can see, the amount is 50,000. So that is why it is showing the 50% of the budget amount there. So what it means is, it is saying this transaction here contributed to 50% of the winter budget, which means you have completed 50% of the winter budget for that month of or that period. So you have completed 50% for that budget. So it's just saying that here. So this is a completely UI formula here. So for now, in our database that we are building here, we can just copy paste this formula here. You don't have to build the formula. You can just copy this formula here, and you just have to update these properties there. So let's copy this, and let's create a property called, let's call that budget effect, and it is going to be a formula property. So yeah, the budget effect, and let's just copy and paste this formula. So now we have to uh, configure the property names here, but it seems that the property names are the same, so it's just automatically got all the values there. So you can just see how it works. Yep. So that is the UI that you can create. So here there is one more thing that you can do. So this is potentially just for better UI look. So you don't want decimals like this in the UI. So you don't want just repeating decimals like that. So what you can do here is, you can go to the format current dot, you're having this value here, right? You can just take this and wrap it inside a round function. So you can just put that inside a bracket. First we need to multiply that by 100, and then we need to call the round function, and finally divide that by 100. Because round function, this value here is inside decimal, so if it is decimal, before I explain, you can just kind of call the current dot amount again. So yeah, so that fixes the decimals thing here. So this amount by current dot amount returns a decimal. So for example, if it is 14%, it will return something like 0.14. And if you call the round function on 0.14, it's going to return you 0, because the round function only takes the first value before the decimal and rounds the remaining, like the digits after the decimal, is just rounded off above or below. So before converting, because the actual part is the 14%, we want 0.14. So we'll multiply that by 100, so we get the actual percentage number. So we can round that, and we can divide that by 100 after the round function is done. And now we have a clear 14%. You can divide that by 100 to get 0.14, and that is correctly formatted as required, and we show that as a whole number here. So that is about the formulas, and that is how we can fix the decimal thing here. So yeah, that fixes the thing. So as you can see, this is showing the UI as required. So this transaction here, this 15,000 transaction, like took away 30% of the new budget and 14% of budget 3 and 15% of another budget. So that's a lot of changes. So this new income here that we got as the first income. So this new income that we got here is of about 45,000 of value, and it completed 90% of a new budget and 45% of another budget. So that is how effective that is. So you can just see this for literally every transaction. You can just add a transaction and see how it affects your budgets that you're having. So that is the budget effect property here. So now let's get into the next property that we are having in the transactions. So next thing that we are having is the warnings. So warnings is also a UI thing. So this checks for certain things, and it just says, it just checks if it is there, it shows the warning, otherwise it is empty. So currently it is only checking for one thing, which is if the amount is empty, we need to warn the user that the amount is empty, because the amount is a very required value for the transaction and our system to work properly. So let's just copy this. This is also for UI. So yeah, so let's just copy that. So let's copy that, put that formula here. Let's call that. So it is actually a formula property. Just came to, so it's a formula property. Let's just paste that here. And yeah, so currently we don't have any warnings for any transactions. So this warnings property here will be used in the main budget tracker. So for some transactions here, as you can see, it is showing a warning here because the amount is empty for the first as for the transaction here. So this is where the warnings can be used, so that we are saying that some action needs to be done because this transaction has an empty amount, so amount is not entered. So once we enter some amount here, so if we enter the amount, the warning just goes away. So that is what is the warning about. So we know that we are saying the user that something important has to be done, so the amount is empty here, and only if the amount is added we can continue with the system will work properly. So that is about okay, so let's get into the next property here. So apparently we have added all the properties here. So you can see here also we have added all the properties. Yeah, so we have added all the properties. Now we need to go. Now let's get, so for the transaction database we have added all the properties in our original template. Now let's go into the next database, which is going to be the budgets. So budgets, actually we are having the budget mixes as the next one. So let's go to the budget mix. So let's go to budget mix and let's see if we have added all the properties and what are the other properties that is required to be added. So in the databases, we are having these properties that we have added. So these are the basic properties that is required for the functionality of the system, or at least the basic functionality of the system. So let's add the other properties that is required. So here, as you can see, let's see what are the properties that we have already added. So income, expense, transactions, all the relation properties is added. Apportionment input is also added. So here, as you can see, it is having all the properties here. So we have added up to this, so all of the remaining properties is required to be added. So most of the things are just UI properties, that is nothing, uh, it is just that. So current appropriation lists out what is the appropriation ratio for each of the budget in the budget mix. So it just uses this income and expense ratios here and combines that with the budget that is allocated here, and it just creates this list here. So I can just explain the formula. Will not be creating the formula here, but just explain what it is and we'll just be continuing with that. So first we are checking if the ratio is valid. So if the ratio is not valid, we are just simply returning invalid ratio. Check ratio property for the details and just change the ratio. So create a valid ratio before seeing the details. So if the ratio is valid, then we are just mapping, or we're just taking each of the income. So we're taking the budget and yeah, we're formatting the current name. So we're returning a list. So it's actually not so readable, but I'll just explain what it is doing overall. So it is taking the entire income list and it is using the map function on that. So it is taking the budgets and it is taking the map function, and it is saying for each budget it is saying to give a list of its name, and it is getting its index. So map has an index variable by default which gives the current position of the value it is taking, and using that index go and get your ratio from the list that is already there. So we're getting the list from the income apportionment ratio, and we are getting that text, we're splitting that gives a list of all the ratios, and we're getting it, we're telling the budget to get your ratio from that list, and it gets a list from that. And yeah, that is the second part of the list. And if it has a percentage, so if the text has percentage, it's just like more like UI. So if it is having a percentage symbol, don't do anything. So if it doesn't have a percentage symbol, add a percentage, so that we always have a percentage after this number here. So that is the reason we're doing that. And after that we're just telling the functions that this is what is essentially doing. So we need to run this twice because income and expense ratios are separate ratios. So we are saying first we are having the income ratio, so we are saying incomes and enter, and after that we are saying the budgets to uh, get the ratio from that list and return the list after formatting, and we are doing that for the expenses. That is what is being done here. So yeah, that is income. So income we have an enter, and for each of the budget it gets its number from this list, and it just displays that. So this is what is shown in the main homepage. Now let's see, yeah, that is the current appropriation. Now let's go into the next formula. So this formula you can just copy and paste here in this database we are having. So you can just create a new formula for that. Let's call this details, and it is going to be a text property. Actually, it is a formula property. So let's change into a formula property and let's just paste that here. And as you can see, this requires a ratio identity property. So which means you have to add that first before trying to add this one. So let's add the ratio iterator first. So here, as you can see, it is using the ratio validity property here, which is here. So this is actually the first one here. So ratio validity checks for some of the important things. The first thing is if there is enough comma. So it actually, like, the validator first checks that, and if it is valid, it is proper. So this validity is accurate. So if given the ratios are valid, it will check if there is enough of, so it's only checking for one thing. So one thing it's checking is if all the amount adds up to 100. That is all it is checking for. It's checking first for expenses, if taking the current value and only taking the number, and if the sum is 100, and it is doing the same thing for the income proportion ratio. So if these two are true, then it is saying it is a valid ratio, and it is just a simple formula. So just add this formula also. Let's just copy this formula and let's add this here. So let's call this ratio validity. Let's call that a formula. Let's just add this formula here. So here it is. So here we are having additional comment. Now we need to select these properties again. So let's just do that. Okay. So now we are having the properties as required. I don't know what this enter was for. So that is the ratio validity. So in this budget mixes, the ratios are valid. And once the ratio validity is there, now we need to go here and let's just give a space and automatically gets the details. And here this I additional is so once you have that, it's fine. Yep. And as you can see, it is showing the ratios as required. So now it is showing the expense ratio and expense details for each of the budget mix. So that is the budget mix details here. So that is the ratio validator and one of these things. So ratio validator is nothing but a more UI friendly version of the ratio validity checker. Uh, or ratio validator just checks if the ratios are valid. It's just more UI friendly one. So you can just go through the formula. I'll not even what is it? I'll just not be building this formula here, or you can just go through the formula for yourself and try to understand what is happening. It's just pretty, it's just straightforward, and it's also well written. It's not, it's kind of straightforward, so you can just read that and try to understand what it is doing. So for now, let's just copy this formula. Just yep, let's just copy this formula, and let's add the formula here. So let's call this ratio operator. That's a formula property, and let's add the formula here. And alright, saying the ratios are valid. That is working as required. The next properties that I need to add is we are having the buttons to add an income and expense, and we are showing the other entries like the current month, two entries, how many entries in the current month, and it's just simple formulas. So you're just taking each of the entries and you're filtering that list of entries for the current month. So you're checking if the time of that or the month of the entry is equal to the current month, and if it is the current month, you just return that entry. So we're filtering that list and we are getting the length of that filter list. So that is the entries count, and we're just showing the UI there. This is a simple formula here. After that, we are having the summary. So this is also a simple formula. So we're getting the total income amount, which is we're filtering the entries, which are the incomes. So we're getting the income entries and we're taking the current amount. So we're telling each of the entry to give its amount. And we're taking that entire list of amounts and we're taking the sum of that amount. So this is income amount and this is expense amount. And after that, we are formatting the details to show that in the UI. And that is the summary property here. And after that, we are having the budgets list. So this is just an internal or a backend helper function. So yeah, that is all of the properties that is inside the budget mix categories. So let's create this add income, add expense, and the other two properties. So add expense here that you're having is a specific budget mix. So when you're when you're clicking this button and adding, you don't have to manually enter the budget mixes. It will automatically create or enter the value for you. So if you see here in the add page property here, so when you're saying add income, this from this budget mix, this page is automatically set by the automation. It automatically sets this budget mix value as this page from which you are adding this transaction. So that is the main reason like we are having a specific button inside the budget mix page here. So let's create these two properties here and let's go and create that in our database. So next we need to add two button properties. So let's call that add income and let's edit the automation. So now the first action that we need to do is we need to create a page in the transaction database. So let's create add page to, and we need to add to the transactions. So we need to search for the transactions. So we got the transaction database. So let's go here And after that we need to edit the property, so we are taking the budget mix property. So now this is where this button or this automation is very helpful, so it automatically sets the budget mix to this page from which you are adding the transaction. And after that we also need to edit the type, which is going to be the income, which is going to be income, and that is all we need to do. And after that, the second another action we need to do is we need to open the page that was just added above. So we need to select the open page action here, and we need to select the page that was added in step 1. So now this is the automation, so you can click save, and that is automation. You can just duplicate this button here, so you can just duplicate this property, and you can just edit the type of transaction to just expense. This is called add expense, and we just have to change the type of the page to expense, and the automation is done. And that is the add expense and income button. So after that, let's get into the next property, which is going to be the transactions in current month value. So it's going to be transactions in current month. This is going to be a formula property. So let's get the formula. So let's just create the other property also and get the formulas from the levels. So, and this is going to be total amounts, and it's going to be actually a formula property. Okay. Let's get the formulas from the other database. So current month total entries, you can just copy this formula and this year, and this actually requires the entries. So here we have given another name for the property, so we just have to check what is the name in this property. So if we go to this property where we have given the name as transactions, so we need to update the property names. So let's call that transactions. So as you can see, it is updated and it is showing the number of entries. So that is this formula. So let's get the summary formula here. So let's copy the entire formula. Let's add the formula here. And here, as you can see, we also have to update the transaction, the property name here, and it's automatically updated. So we also have to add it here. So now it is automatically updated and it's showing the values as required. So that is the transaction income. That is the properties that we have just added. The total number of entries in the current month and the total amount values. Now let's see what are the other properties that is required, and let's see. So that is the total properties that is required. So budget list is not necessarily required. So we already have a helper function here. As you can see, we are creating an apportionment helper function that just does that. So if we further require more properties, maybe we can create a budget list like that, but for now it's not so required. So you can just edit this property here. So we have created the properties here, so all the properties that is in the databases. Now let's get into the next database, final database, which is the budgets database. So let's add the remaining properties that is required to be added. So let's see in this thing, in this database, what we have added. So this is the budgets database, and let's see what are the other properties that is added. So the other properties are mostly UI properties. So let's see what you first already added. So type, reach, amount, now this is already added, number of days, all these are already there. So type, amount, reach, the additional property is progress and limit, and the start date, number of days, and that is already added, budget mix is added. So these two are the only properties that we require to add, which is nothing but the progress or limit. It's just a simple formula. It's just using the round function, reach amount by total amount. It's a simple formula. So that is the progress or limit, and we're just displaying that progress or limit or the progress text using uh, to be displayed in the UI. Just formatting that and displaying in the UI. So yes, that is the entire formula. So you can just read the formula for yourself. It's just simple. You can just try to understand how the formula works, or how it's just a simple formula. You can just read it and understand how it is. So yeah, so that is the formula. So let's just create the properties. So let's call this progress limit each percentage. It's going to be a formula property, and let's get the formula from this database. And we actually have to update the property names if it is different. Actually, the property names are the same, so it is actually working as required. And this one here, this property here is displaying in decimals by default, so we have to use the built-in Notion property uh, feature. So if it is a number property that is returned, it will have a show as value here. We can show that as a bar, and you can choose the color that you want. So you can just keep that green. And yeah, so that is, you don't have to divide the number by anything, it's just by one. So just can give that, give that as one. And yeah, show number, so that is the thing. So that is the progress or limit. So maybe we can also create or give this value as 100. So let's see what number is coming. Maybe it's actually 1. So yeah, the new update. So this, it is 1. And as you can see, it is showing the thing as required. So you can actually remove this number here. So we also have to update one of the things. So in the UI, you can update the number format to percentage. So now it shows with the percentage amount here. So that is how we create the progress limit formula here. And let's go to the next one. So the next formula here is the progress text. So if you just copy the formula here, so create a property here, and that is going to be a formula property. And let's add the property here. And we have to actually update one of the properties. So let's see what the property is. So yep, so as you can see, it is showing the value here. So if it is a limit, it is showing in brown text. Otherwise, it is showing in blue text. So that is the progress text, and we have added the properties that is required for the budgets and all of the three databases that is required. So that is the other properties that we require to add. So these are the properties that is required to be added. Now we have successfully completed creating the databases that is required for the template databases for building the template. Next thing that you have to do is you have to create the UI for the template. So let's come to our template here. As you can see, the UI is empty. There is any UI is not shown here. So we have to create views for the databases and build the pages for that. And we have to create the UI for the template. So the first thing that you need to build is you need to customize the page because we want the budget tracker to look something like this. But currently, as you can see, the side there's a lot of space on the right and left. So we need to kind of fill this entire page. So we need to customize the page for that. Let's click on the three dot menu on the top right corner, and you can click on full width, and so that you can see more content in the same area. So and after that, you can enable small text, so it looks much more readable. So now this makes the template much more better. So the next thing that we need to add is we need to add what are the sections of our page. So first let's start with the main section here, which is going to be the quick action section. So let's get to that. So for that, let's create a divider, and below the divider, let's create our buttons that we need. So first we're going to be creating two columns. As in the UI you might have seen, it is two column button. So let's create the two columns. And the first column we're going to be creating the button for add income. So let's add a button type block here. So let's call this new income. And you can select the account here. So for us, we can choose something like this. So this is called new income. Now for that, the action that we want to do is we want to add a page to incomes database. So we have the cash flow entries database. This actually transactions entries. This is the entries database here. So we want to add the name as I don't know we open to for the user to add. So we want to add the other properties which is time, which is the date, and the type is going to be income. And as you can see here, there is this budget property, but you cannot select anything here dynamically. You have to select that manually when you're adding the transaction, but instead in the next section, we'll be having a way to add income from the budget mix so that all these properties are automatically added. So this is more like a generic button that exists. So if at all you want to add it immediately, we'll just click the new income button and you just add the income. So that is the entries. This is the first action. The next action that we want to do is we want to open this page that we just added. So let's click the open page and for select a page you can click the page add in step 1, and that is the button we have to create here. So let's duplicate this. So it's going to be almost the same thing for expenses, just the type will be different. So we can move this to second column and let's configure that. So it's going to be called new expense. And after that, we need to edit the type to expense. The other things in the automation is just the same. So we can click done. So this is this is our quick navigation menu for the first section in our template. And after that, we need to create the next section. So the next section for us is the budget mixes section. So before we get into the next section, let's create the name and the icon and cover page. So let's to add the icon, we can click add icon here, and we can add some icon here. So let's see what we are at here. We added some currency symbols. So let's search for, it's actually icons. We can search for currencies, and it is showing this currency here. We can just add that. So we have added the icon here. Now we want a cover page. For that, you can click this cover button here. Once you add this, it will get generic or default cover page here. So you can just edit that using the change button here. So for now, I'm just going to create a gradient color, some background image. Later, if you want, you can customize this like in the budget tracker template. So you can just click on something here, some picture here, and you can just select that. And we also want to reverse this so that we see the change correctly. So we can just drag it. As you can see, it changes the color is changing. So you can just drag the image. So just to reposition it what you want. So you want something like light color. So maybe you can just change the push change the pictures is not very okay. So maybe we can add this plate color here. So this is the budget tracker. So that is how you add the icon and cover page for the template. So now let's get into the next section that we want to create. So the next one is the budget mixes. So here it is. So first thing here, there is only a single block in the section. The block is a database view. So this database view we're going to get it from the budget mixes database that you're already having. So let's create a view for that. For that, you can click the slash, and after that you can select database inline. So you can just click enter. And after that, it will ask for what is the database that you want to create. You can search for budget mixes, and we are actually having two budget mix categories. So you want to actually, so instead of adding it like that, if you're having many similar budgets, another way you can add that is let's delete this. So or you can just click control Z. Okay. So other way to add this is you can go to the database itself, and you can click on this six menu dot here, and you can click on copy link. So that link will be copied, and after that you can just go to where you want to add the database and click on Control V, and you can click here to link database view. So by this your is much more faster and much more accurate. So this is a faster way to do that. So let's click on a new table view. So since we actually want a gallery view here about the budget mixes that we are having, so let's click on the gallery view for on database, and we have to configure that. So for now, we can just click gallery and we can just give a name to the view. So let's call that add budget mixes, or yeah, or you can just call it budget mixes. And now we have the database here. So here we are actually displaying it called add by budget mix. So here we can just display budget mix. So we have to now configure this database that we just added. So let's add a divider here. So section. So yeah, so now we have to configure the database here. So to click on to configure the database, you can click on the settings button here. If you just click that, you can see all the settings related to the database. Now we have to click on first. Let's configure the layout. So in the layout, we select gallery, and after that we have to select these, configure these. So database title around so title, so that we can see what is the name that is given first database in the view. And after that, that is pretty much this one. So no limit, you can give some R of 25. So just don't clutter in the main home page. So and page icon is optional. Wrap all content is also optional. So that is about that. So card preview, we can click it, we can select none, so that we don't see any image or copy. It's much more compact there. And card preview, that's what is selected. And after that, card size can be small because we only want to show the buttons, and the size can be list so that we can display our products. So this is about the layout, and after that we have the properties. So for the properties, we need to add four different properties. So let's go and see our template. So as you can see, the first property that we need to add is the number of entries, the total income expense is summary that is stated in the property is stated that. After that, we need to add the add income and add expense totals. So we can just click on those properties that are already having. We just created that earlier. So let's click on the first one that we need to add is the transactions in current month. So let's display the properties here. And after that, we need to add the summary. So let's search for the summary. And now we don't have a summary property, so we just added the summary property. So we just have to go and see here. So in our database, as we can see, it is we actually have the property. The name of the property is total amounts. So yeah, it can just be there. So let's go and select the property here. So let's select the property called total amounts, and that will show us the property amounts. The next three other properties are add income and add expense. Now, as you can see, this added income and add expense is in separate lines. We don't want this to be in separate lines. We want something like this, where these two are in the same line, so it is much more easier to add and it looks better here. So let's see how we can bring these two in the same line. So to do that, you can go to the layout, the settings, and then in the layout, you can click on compact here, and that would do nothing as of now, so it does not make any changes, but it does make a change, and it will change now. So it does not make any change like that. So it will both not make any change now. So you can, after that, after you click that, you can see there is a new setting that is available here, which is called compact card setting. You can just click on that, and now it will ask you for what are the transactions, or what are the properties you want to show on a single or separate line. So you can toggle the current month and total amounts, and we want these add income and add expense to be in the same line, so we'll be keeping that off. And after that, we have to kind of also adjust our card size. If we click that medium, and now you can see that these are showing the add income and add expense button in the same line. So if we did not select these two, you can see that all of some of the things are in the same line. So first and second property is also in the same line. So we want these to be in separate line. So we can click on this so that they are in separate line like that. And we also want total amounts to be separate line. And now as you can see, these two are in separate line, and the other to the last two properties are in a single line. So this is what we wanted. So that is what how you can configure using the compact card layout for the table. So that is the budget mixes section, budget mixes sections. That is what you have to be doing here. So once you kind of create the databases and the properties they are already having, creating views is just much more simpler. You don't have to create any new properties. You just have to decide on what properties to show and whether that is relevant to be shown in the database, relevant to be shown in view. So that is about the budget mix section. So let's get into the next section. So next section we are having is the entry section, which displays all of the entries, or at least the latest entries. So currently in the earlier database, there was no filters or sorts or any those kind of things. So here in this entries, we have a sort property here, which is by time. So we'll be getting into that later on. So for now, let's add this section in our template. So let's go to a template. Let's add a new section here. So I'd like to first add a divider for that. And after that, we can click on this plus icon here to create a block here. So after that, we need to go, we have to create the view for the database. So as I explained earlier, you can just go to the database here, and you can click on the transactions database because that is where we get the entries. You can click on that, you can click on copy link, and you can just go back, and you can just paste that here and select link database view. So that automatically creates a view for the database. And we actually want to list view, so for now we can just create on list new table view, and we can configure that to list. So we click on list here and call that latest entries. And after that, you have to configure the details here. You can do that quite a well. So now this is our transactions database. So I just realized that earlier in our automation also we kind of did add page to entries, but it is actually the transaction database. So let's click on transactions here, and we have to configure that again. So let's click on type. It's going to be confirm, and then it's going to be configured. And let's do the same for the expenses. So it is actually the transaction database property and this expense property. Correct. So that is the button. So that is just remember that. So as we went to the database, you can see that it is transaction database. Okay. So now we have added the linked view. Now we have view of the database here. Now let's configure this view here. So let's click on the settings and layout. Inside the layout, we have already selected list. And for the list, we don't want to show the data source title. We want to show what's the view name. So the view name is latest entries, which is displayed there. And after that, own pages and site page, that is not required. So we just keep it as default. Load pages limit, we can keep that to 25 so that we only see, you don't clutter the database with too many pages. So that is in the layout settings. And after that, we want to decide what properties to show. So let's see our template here. So as you can see, it is displaying the entries by some category here. It is grouping these entries. So it's grouping by 7 days, 30 days, Jan 26 and September 25. So it's just showing, it's grouping these by date. So to do that, what you have to do is let's get on a template. So we want to group these transactions by date. So let's click on this group. So if you go to the settings here, there is an option called group. So if you click on group, you can just select the property to group the transactions by, and you can click on manual time, or you can just click on times, that is calculated property. And if you click on time, it's going to show date by relative, day, week, month here. So we just click on relative. So that, for example, if it is just yesterday, it will show yesterday, and if it is in past month, it will show in past month. But instead, if you just click on date, it will show entries on each day. You can just configure that as how you would like it to have. So relative makes much more sense because it just groups automatically groups by last day, because just want to see what the transaction last day and last week, and you can just show that. But if you prefer, you want to see each of the transactions by day or week or even month, you can change it to day or month. You can just select the option here. So that is the grouping settings, and after that you can sort that by newest to first, because that's very important, because you want the latest increase to be shown first. So we can leave the remaining settings by the default. So hide empty spaces that automatically hides empty groups, and you have these things here. That is the grouping settings. Now let's see what are the properties that we need to display in the list. So first property, that there are almost one, uh, there are four properties to display. So the first one is the type of the transaction. So this, as you can see, we are also having conditional color. So if the page is an income, we color that in green. So first let's add the properties, and you can think about that later on. So that first is type, and after that we have the budget ratios. This is much more like to show in the UI. So what are the effects this transaction is having on the budgets, and after that we have the amount and the date or the time that we want to add. So let's go to the budget driver. Let's add the properties. So let's click on the settings. Let's go to property visibility, and let's select the properties. The first one is type. And after that, we had budget effect, the UI thing that we want to display. As you can see, it's shown there. And after that, we want to show the amount and the time of the transaction. So, so once you do this, you can see all of these properties are added, but it is not yet organized or in the order that we want. So to do that, you can go to property visibility, and you want the type to be shown above name. But if you drag the type along above the name, it doesn't go above that. It doesn't get reordered. So what you have to do is instead you have to drag the name down so that it brings the type above. So that is how you reorder the first properties there. So the other properties can remain in their own places. So amount is, so after that we have the budget effect, amount and the date. So that is the properties that we want to display. So if you see in our template, there is also one more thing that is done, which is conditional color. So let's see how we can do that. So let's go to our template and let's click on the settings. So in the settings, we have a conditional color option. You can just click on that and click on new color setting. And let's add our color. We can choose the property which you want to add the color. So you can just click on the type of the transactions you want to display the color based on the type of the transaction. So let's click on type, and you want to select a filter by for the type property. We just the if it is not empty, we just want to add the color. So if the color background color is going to be match option, so you can either manually select the transaction or the color, but you can click match option. So here, if for the properties you want to click manually, you have to click on this and select income, and you have to select green here. So instead of doing this manually, I can just click on the filter called type is not empty, and you can just select this match option, which automatically colors the transaction based on the type of the color of the option there, based on the color of the option that we have given for the property. So that is conditional colors. That is the property set. That is the conditional color that you want to add. So that is the transaction that you want to add. Now it is just looking just as in the template here. So that is a transaction section. So since we are having a lot of transactions here, it is also grouping them by the state. In our example or in our template that we are building, there's only three expenses that we are having or three transactions that we are having. So it's just only displaying these three. So now, so let's get into the next section. So the next section is going to be the active budgets. So or the budget section. So in this we are displaying the budgets grouped by the type of the budget, and just showing what is the progress or limit and what is the till when which date is the budget is going to be there. So let's create the section here. So let's get a new section. I'm going to for that. Now click on this icon to get the database view. So you want a view of the budget database. So let's go to databases and let's click on budgets. Let's click copy link and let's paste that here. Let's click on link database view. That automatically creates a view of the database or view of the budget database. Now we want a gallery view, so let's click on table view for now and we can configure that later. So let's click on the gallery view here. So now we have the option to select what type of view, so we can click on gallery view, and the name of the view is going to be all budgets. So or you can just click on budgets, so that displays all budgets. So that is our database here. So let's configure the database. Let's click on settings, layout, and we have to first decide on the settings. So we want to show the view name. So let's click on turn it off, and after that we have wrap content. All this is fine. And in cart preview, we want one, and the cart size can be small for now. So if we want medium, we can just change that later. So let's click on small for now. And the cart layout can be list for now. We can change that as we go later. So that is the layout. Next, we have to decide on what properties to show in the database. So in the budgets, we need to show the, the properties that is required to be shown is the type, the end date of the budget, and the progress or limit percentage. So we have already created these properties. So let's configure that in our database. So let's click on the settings, property visibility, and let's select the properties. First one is type, and after that end date, and after that we want to show the progress or limit percentage. So these are the three properties that we want to add. So that is the budget section here. So we actually only want to show the budgets that is currently active. So As you can see, it is showing active budgets and there is also a filter here. So let's create that in our template. So let's call this active budgets. And for to check whether a budget is active, we need to create a filter for that. So let's create a filter, and it is we need to filter this by end date. So or we can filter by both start date and end date. So let's create an advanced filter for that. You can do that by clicking on the three dot menu on top of the current filter, and there will be an option called add to add advanced filter. You just click on that, and after that you will get something like this. So first we need to check if the start date is earlier than today. So if start date is after today, we don't want that to be shown. So don't check if the start date is earlier than today. So the first property is start date, and started property. So every date property has its own start date and end date inside that property itself. So it's just going to take the start date. And after that is related to today, or we need to actually select is before and is before today. So that is what we want. And after that, we also want to add another rule. So we want to also check for the end date. So you want to check if the end date, you want only the transactions or only the budgets if the end date is later than today. So that we are in that range. So the budgets which are in the current range, so start date to end date is today falls on the start date between the start date and end date. So you only want to show those budgets, so those are the active budgets, so only want to show that. So let's add a filter rule for that. Let's click on add rule, add filter rule, and click on this button add filter rule. And after that, it will show the same thing that was added earlier in the previous rule. So here let's select the end date property. So end date and start date for the date also, and is after today. So this would filter the active budgets for us, and that is the filter that we want to add. And if you add that, you can see that only the transactions which is false on the which are the transactions which are the budgets are currently active, only those budgets will be shown here. So that is the active budget. So here, as you can see, the end date is April 15th, and the start date is obviously earlier than today. So since it is only ending on April 15th and it is started earlier than today, which means April 4th, that is today's date, is going to be is an active budget as of today. So that is what is described there. So if we change the date to if we change the start date, so it is actually automatic calculation number of days. So if we change the date and it is a date earlier than today's date, it is going to be not displayed in this view. So that is about the active budgets. And let's create the grouping and the other things we want to create. So here, as you can see, the budgets are grouped by type. So let's create that. So click on settings and let's click on group. Then after we want to group by type, let's click on type and you want to select that by option and sort as ascending, or you can click on manual since there's only two types. You can click on manual also, but ascending is just fine. So just click on that and other can be as the defaults. So that is how you add the grouping for the active budgets. So that is how you add the budget for this. So in the template, as you can see, it is a medium size, so it's actually looking much more better in the UI. So let's configure the layout and can select the card size to be medium so that it is looking much more better in the UI. And that is how we add the active budget section. So the next section is you're having is pretty much straightforward. So the next one is we need to add the pages for all of managing all of these income expenses, budgets, and other mixes in a detailed way. So let's add these pages here. So let's add a new section. So there is already a section is added. So let's click create new pages for that. We need to create 3 pages. So let's create the page block there. So once you have the page block, you can just create the names later on. So now let's create the pages. So we want 3 pages. So 2 and 3. Now we have the pages that we require. And now let's call this all income and expenses. You can also call that as all transactions, but you can just call it all income expenses to be much more clear. And the next page is going to be all budgets. After that, the next one is going to be all budget mixes. these are the three pages. So clicking into these pages will get into the separate pages for each of the databases where you can manage income and budgets and budget mixes. So in this video, we are only going to be seeing up to this one. We're not going to be creating each of the individual pages that we want. So you can just go to the template and you can just preview for yourself. It's just a simple one. So you can just see what are the sections that is in the page and you can just create the database views and configure the properties as well. It is much more simpler. Just as how we did in this video, you can just try to do it by yourself. You can go to the template and you can just see what are the sections that is there and you can just create that for yourself. So just create that again. So let's just see that. So that is how we create the UI for us. So now let's add much more customizations. As you can see, after each of the page, we have added some dividers and we also colored the page in blue color. So let's just do that. So let's add a divider after each page. So let's click on this plus and we add the divider up. And as you can see, it's added all of these things. And if you observe it closely, you can see this divider is much more bolder than the previous one that is added. So if you add that via the divider button or the plus icon, that's what is going to happen. So instead, you can just click on escape and you can just manually type the hyphen and it automatically adds that. So that is the divider. The next thing that you want to do is you want to add color for the page. So let's click on the six dot menu and let's click on color and we can click on blue background. That adds color for the blocks that you are having here. And after that, you can just click that. And you can also click on Control Shift H so that automatically takes the color for the last color that you used. So let's click on this one and Control Shift H that automatically colors the database with the last color that you used in the previous action. Or it automatically colors the page with the previous color that you used in the previous action. So that is the income budgets and budget mixes, and that is how we create our template here. So this is our new budget tracker template that we just built. That we just built. So this is how you can create a budget tracker template. And there's also a few more things that you can do. You can move this databases thing into other, or you can just call this page as other, or you can just click. You can click on this page, add an icon. So you can icon can be something like search for data, and you can see there will be a database of stuff. This icon here. You can just click on that. It looks much more like a database. You can just click on that. And after that, we also want these transactions or these databases to be shown as page. So instead of inline, we can change that to in page. It's much more so it's much more better UI. So to do that, you can go click on this six dot menu. You can just click this menu here, and you can select on turn into page. So this creates just a page. I can click into a separate page. So you can just do that for all of the properties. You can just click on turn into page. For all the database, you can do that. So turn page. So this now you can just see all the databases in place much more clear, and just click on to one of the pages and you can go to the database in a separate page. So that is what you can do. And yeah, so this is the databases page. So that is how you create database. So to make this much more cleaner, so you can just create a separate columns and just create two columns, and you can add the database to the second column here. You can add this database to the other column and drag this all the way all the way smaller. So now it is much more databases. It's just there, and yeah, it is just there. You can just click onto the database. You can just want to click, just go to the database and configure the database itself. So yeah, that is the databases, and you can also give a color for the database. Can be say create background. So that is how you create a template. So we have completed creating the bullet tracker template. So that is what we'll be doing in this video, and we have created databases here. So to go to the other, then it will be the same thing. So yeah. So that is the bullet tracker template. Hope you found this video helpful. If you have any doubts or anything that you want to say about the video, you can just comment that down below. So you can just use the comment section for that. You can share your thoughts about the template and you can say if something needs to be improved or if you have any doubts or questions you want to ask, you can just use the comment box below and you can just comment that. Hope you found this video helpful. Thank you for watching.